He had everything: vast lands, cattle, and a seemingly infinite fortune. But at the end of his life, the billionaire was alone, abandoned on an isolated Texas ranch, waiting for death. His health was frail, his heart hardened by greed. But destiny, with its peculiar irony, had something unusual in store. An unknown widow, with nothing but kindness in her heart, crossed his path. Unknowingly, she was about to rescue not just a life, but a soul. Get ready for a story about hope, redemption, and the discovery that the greatest wealth isn't measured in money. The vastness of the Solitaire Ranch, with its 100,000 acres of arid land and cattle grazing under the scorching Texas sun, was living proof of John "Jack" Carter's empire. But for Jack, this landscape was merely the frame of a prison. At 75, the once robust cowboy, who had built his fortune from nothing with an iron fist and a keen business instinct, was now confined to a wheelchair, a dying man without hope. His heart, once a tireless engine, failed with every beat, and his liver, punished by decades of excess, was nothing more than an echo of its former self. His eyes, blue as the Texas sky, had lost their sparkle, reflecting only loneliness and regret. The mansion, with its luxurious oak furniture and Persian tapestries, was silent and cold. His children, more interested in his inheritance than his health, had long since distanced themselves. The last person he had trusted, his lawyer, was a vulture offering him investment advice that looked more like schemes to drain his last cents. The physical pain was a constant nuisance, but the pain of his soul was unbearable. Jack felt like a dethroned king in his own castle, with a single thought tormenting him. He had sacrificed everything: love, family, friendships, for power and money, and in the end he had nothing. One day, as he looked out the window at the golden horizon, an old ranch hand, a longtime friend, visited him. The conversation was brief and painful. The old friend, before leaving, said, "Jack, you may be the richest man in Texas, but you're also the poorest. Money buys everything but peace. And it seems that's the one thing you don't have." This phrase echoed in Jack's mind, amplifying his misery. That same night, as the loneliness weighed more heavily than the pain, he heard the news on TV about the death of an old business rival, a man who, though less wealthy, was known for his generosity and his close-knit family. The contrast was overwhelming. Jack knew he was at the end of the line. Without hope of recovery, he had dismissed almost all his nursing staff, leaving only a night caregiver who barely spoke to him. In his mind, he already considered himself a ghost. His only company was the void, the echo of a past he couldn't change. John Carter's routine was monotonous and bleak. Days of silence, nights of insomnia, the creak of the wheelchair, and the sound of the wind howling across the vast ranch were his only companions. Each day, his weakness grew and his will to live diminished. His doctor, a practical and cold man, was blunt. "Mr. Carter, there's not much more we can do. We need a miracle or a new spirit. And, frankly, spirit is what you lack most." Jack heard the truth with resignation. Money, which he believed was the solution to all problems, couldn't buy a new heart, a healthy liver, or, most importantly, hope. Loneliness was his most aggressive cancer. One day, his caregiver, the only person who dared to be in his presence, told him she had to be away for a few days to deal with a family matter. "I'll send a substitute," she said, without emotion. Jack barely reacted. A substitute? What could she do? He had already given up. The next morning, instead of the old, grumpy caregiver, a small, gray-haired woman appeared. She introduced herself as Abigail Stewart. Her eyes were kind and carried the pain of someone who had suffered a lot, but her smile was warm. She was a widow, living in a small nearby town, and out of necessity, she had taken the job. Jack, with his usual indifference, ignored her. "Just do your job," he grumbled. But Abigail was different. She didn't talk about his business or his fortune. She talked about life. As she helped him with his meals, she told stories about her hometown, about the old pastor, about children playing in the square. She didn't treat him like a sick billionaire, but like a human being. On the first day, she noticed a yellowed photograph on a bookshelf, showing a young Jack smiling beside a horse. "Did you like horses?" she asked, with genuine interest. Jack was surprised. No one, in years, had been interested in his past, in the things he loved. The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, but a shy, long-forgotten smile appeared on his face. "I loved them," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. That night, Abigail, instead of watching TV in her room, sat in the living room with him. They didn't talk much, but her presence was a balm. The silence, once oppressive, was now peaceful. The initial conflict, the central problem, was there. John Carter, the man who had built his world on isolation and coldness, was now in contact with something he had banished from his life: human connection. The seed of hope, small and fragile, had just been planted in barren ground. Abigail's presence became a point of light in the darkness that enveloped John Carter's life. She cared for him with a dedication that came not from a work contract, but from genuine compassion. Over time, their conversations grew deeper. Jack, still skeptical and suspicious, slowly began to let his guard down. He realized she didn't see him as a source of wealth, but as a man on the brink of an abyss. One day, while dusting a bookshelf, Abigail found an old, faded leather-bound diary. The diary was secured with a rusty metal clasp. With curiosity and respect, she showed it to Jack. "It seems it was yours," she said, her voice soft. John looked at the diary, and his eyes welled up with tears. "It's my wife Eleanor's diary," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I hid it here after she passed. I couldn't bear to read her words anymore. The pain was unbearable." He, who had boasted of never crying, was on the verge of an emotional breakdown. Eleanor, his late wife, was the only person who loved him unconditionally, the only one who saw beyond his ambition. Her death, years ago, had transformed him into the cold and bitter man he was. The diary contained the story of their love, from their youth to their life on the ranch, and also spoke of her sorrows and concerns about Jack's excessive ambition. "Read it to me," he asked Abigail, his voice a whisper. "Read to me what I never had the courage to read." Abigail, surprised by the request, took the diary and, in a sweet and calm voice, began to read Eleanor's words. With each page, a story of love, longing, and, more than anything, a plea for Jack not to get lost in greed. With each word, a blow to his hardened heart. The climax of the chapter came with the reading of a passage that spoke about their son, Robert, who had estranged himself from his father years ago due to a disagreement over inheritance. Eleanor's letter said she had forgiven Jack, but asked him to make peace with their son. "Money isn't worth the distance you've put between you," she had written. "He still loves you, John. You just need to take the first step. And if you won't do it for him, do it for me." The revelation that his wife had forgiven him, even with all his flaws, was the turning point. The tears, once timid, now flowed freely down Jack's face. The pain he felt was a mixture of sadness and guilt, but for the first time in years, there was also a glimmer of hope. He needed to make peace with his son. He needed to honor Eleanor's memory. Reading Eleanor's diary was the turning point John Carter needed. From that moment on, the loneliness and bitterness that consumed him began to be replaced by a new and powerful motivation: the quest for redemption. He clung to this hope like a drowning man in a sea of regrets. The first and most difficult step was to reconnect with his son, Robert. The estrangement between them was a deep wound. Robert, a man in his 40s, had become a respected lawyer in another city, far from his father's shadow. He was married and had a daughter, whom Jack had never met. The fight years ago had been over the family inheritance, a topic that, ironically, Jack now considered insignificant. In the past, Jack had refused Robert's request to fund a small charity clinic he wanted to open. "Money is for investing, not for throwing away," he had said, with his usual coldness. The tension between father and son was palpable. Jack, with Abigail's help, tried to call Robert. He picked up the phone with a trembling hand, and his heart raced. He knew the call might be refused. The door slammed in his face. The tension was almost unbearable. On the other end of the line, the phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. He tried again and again. Nothing. Abigail, with her gentle wisdom, calmed him down. "He might not be home. Don't give up." But disappointment took hold of Jack. He felt weak, defeated. But Abigail's perseverance pushed him on. She encouraged him to write a letter, an honest letter from the heart, explaining what he felt and how much he regretted it. He, the man who had always communicated through lawyers and contracts, now found himself writing a letter, a confession of his failures. As Jack wrote, another twist came to light. His lawyer, the vulture he already suspected, appeared at the ranch with documents for Jack to sign, transferring part of his assets to an investment fund in the lawyer's name, claiming it was a measure to protect his wealth. Abigail, who was paying attention, noticed the maneuver and alerted Jack. "Don't sign that," she said firmly. "It's a scam." Jack, now wiser, confronted the lawyer. The tension in the room was palpable. Jack, his voice weak but firm, refused to sign. He had freed himself from greed and lies, and now it was time to get rid of the people who profited from them. The lawyer's mask of a lamb, which he had worn for years, fell. He, who thought Jack was just a dying old man, was now facing a man who was being reborn. Jack's refusal to sign the documents was a turning point. From that moment on, the fight for redemption became a race against time, a battle between life and death. The lawyer, enraged and unmasked, threatened John. "You'll regret this, you old fool," he shouted before leaving the ranch. The threat, instead of scaring Jack, gave him new strength. He knew he was doing the right thing. With Abigail's help, he wrote a letter to Robert, an honest letter full of regret and love. He sent it by express delivery, hoping it would arrive in time. Jack's health, however, was deteriorating rapidly. One night, he suffered a collapse. Abigail, in a panic, called an ambulance and Robert. She left a message on his son's answering machine, begging him to come. "Your father is dying, and he needs you. He's changed, Robert. Please, come." The hours dragged on, tense, full of uncertainty. In the hospital's emergency room, Jack was weak, connected to machines. He knew the end was near. He had done what he could, but would it be enough? He looked at Abigail, who was holding his hand, and his eyes were full of tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "You showed me that life is worth living." Just as he was about to lose consciousness, the door to the room opened. Robert, in a suit with a tired expression, appeared at the door. He had heard Abigail's message and taken the first available flight. He looked at his father, a man he barely recognized. The powerful billionaire, the giant of the ranch, was now a frail and dependent man. The tension between the two was palpable. Robert, still with the wounds of the past, was hesitant. "Why did you call me?" he asked, his voice filled with pain. Jack, with a weak voice, took the letter he had written and handed it to Robert. "Read it," he said. "Read it and forgive me." Robert read the letter. With each word, the wall he had built around his heart began to crumble. The honest words of his father, the genuine regret, the confession that ambition had blinded him, were enough. He, who had promised never to look at his father again, knelt beside the bed. Their tears mingled. "I forgive you, Dad," he said, his voice choked. "I've always loved you." The scene was a climax of emotion and redemption. The man who had closed himself off from love was now on his deathbed, surrounded by it. He looked at Abigail, who was crying with relief and joy, and at his son, who was holding his hand and a smile. The first genuine smile in years appeared on his face. He had found his peace. He had found his family. And he knew that whatever came next, he would no longer be alone. The reconciliation with his son, Robert, was the last and most important battle John Carter faced. And it was the only one he truly won. The peace he found in his final moments, surrounded by Robert and Abigail, was a gift that money could never buy. He lived for another week, a week of quiet conversations, laughter, and family stories. He met his granddaughter, a 6-year-old girl, who looked at him with the curiosity and love that only children can offer. That week, he wasn't the billionaire John Carter, but Grandpa John, the man who told stories of horses and ranch adventures. He passed away peacefully, with a full heart. His will, which the lawyer had tried to manipulate, was reviewed by Robert. In his last wishes, Jack left the majority of his fortune to Robert's charity foundation, the very one he had once refused to fund. He also left a significant portion to Abigail, in gratitude for saving his life and his soul. Robert took over the Solitaire Ranch, but with a new vision. He turned most of the property into a nature reserve, a sanctuary for wildlife. And the mansion, once a mausoleum of solitude, became a research and education center dedicated to helping the local community. Abigail, with the fortune she received, built a small orphanage and a senior care center, which she named after Eleanor Carter. She, the unknown widow, had not only rescued a man's life, but had also rescued his legacy. The story of John Carter became a legend in Texas. The legend of a man who, despite having everything, had to lose almost everything to understand what truly mattered. The story of a billionaire who, at the end of his life, traded his greed for love and his loneliness for family, and who, thanks to the kindness of a stranger, found the redemption and peace he so desperately sought. The reflection that remains is that true wealth lies not in the possessions we accumulate, but in the people we love and the actions we take to do good. And that it is never too late to change, to ask for forgiveness, and to find hope, even in the darkest of times.